Book of Heaven, Volume 29, Part 10, June 30th, 1931. How the greatest grace that God gave to man in creation was for him to be able to do his acts in the divine will. How this kingdom exists, and lived humanities have possessed it. I was thinking about the holy divine volition. How can its kingdom ever come upon earth? Given the tempestuous times that threaten storms and the sad conditions of the human generations, it seems impossible. And it seems to me that the indifference and lack of disposition of those who at least are said to be good increase the impossibility, for they have no interest in making known a will so holy, and his will that wants to give the great grace of wanting to reign in the midst of creatures. How can a good ever have life if it is not known? But while I was thinking of this, my lovable Jesus, surprising me, told me, "My daughter, that which is impossible in the human views, everything is possible to God. You must know that the greatest grace that we gave to man in his creation was that he could enter into our divine will, to be able to emit his human acts. And since the human will was small, and the divine great, it therefore had the virtue of absorbing the small into the great, and of changing the human into divine will. So at the beginning of his creation, Adam entered into the order of our divine will, and in it he did many of his acts. And while by withdrawing from our divine will, he went out from inside of it, his human acts, operated in our will, remained as pledge and right for man, and as beginning and foundation of a divine kingdom which he acquired. In the divine will, whatever is done in it is indelible. God himself cannot delete a single act done by the creature in the supreme Fiat. Now, since Adam was the first man to be created, it came as a consequence that he, being as though the root, the trunk of all the human generations, they would inherit, almost like branches, what the root and the trunk of the tree of man possessed. And just as all creatures, as though by nature, inherit the seed of original sin, so do they inherit his first acts done in our will, which constitute the beginning and the right of the kingdom of our divine will for creatures. To confirm this came the humanity of the Immaculate Virgin, to operate and to follow the acts of Adam, in order to fulfill, whole and entire, the kingdom of the divine will, to be the first heiress of a kingdom so holy, and to give to her dear children the rights for them to possess it. And to complete all this came my humanity, which by nature possessed the divine will that Adam and the sovereign queen possessed by grace, in order to confirm with the seal of its acts this kingdom of the divine will. So this kingdom exists in reality, because living humanities have formed their acts in it, as the necessary materials in order to form this kingdom, to give to other humanities the right to possess it. and in order to further confirm it, I taught thee our Father, so that with prayer they might dispose themselves and acquire the rights to receive it, and God may feel as though the duty to give it. By teaching thee our Father, I myself placed in their hands the right to receive it, and I committed myself to giving a kingdom so holy. And every time the creature recites the Our Father, she acquires a sort of right to enter into this kingdom. First, because it is the prayer taught by me, which contains the value of my prayer. Second, because the love of our divinity toward the creatures is so great that we pay attention to everything. We notice everything, even the littlest acts, the holy desires, the little prayers, to requite them with great graces. We can say that they are pretexts, occasions that we keep looking for her to say to her, "You have done this, and we give you this. You have done the small, and we give you the great." Therefore, the kingdom exists. And if I have spoken to you so much about my divine will, those have been nothing other than the preparations of many centuries of my church, the prayers, the sacrifices, and the continuous recitation of the Our Father that have inclined our goodness to choose a creature in order to manifest to her the many knowledges of our will, its great prodigies. In this way, I bound my will to the creatures, giving them new pledges of its kingdom. And as you listened and tried to model yourself after my teachings that I gave you, so I formed new bonds to bind the creatures in my will. You must know that I am the God of all, and when I do a good, I never do it isolated. I do it for all, unless someone who does not want to take does not take. And when a creature corresponds to me, I look at her not as one alone, but as belonging to the whole human family, and therefore the good of one is communicated to the others. Now, if the kingdom exists, lived humanities have possessed it, and lived life in it, my will wants to reign in the midst of creatures, my very knowledges say it in clear notes. How, then, can you think that it is impossible for this kingdom to come? To me, everything is possible. I will make use of the very storms and of new events in order to prepare those who must occupy themselves with making my will known. The storms serve to purify the bad air and also to get rid of noxious things. Therefore, I will dispose everything. I know how to do everything. I have the times at my disposal. So let your Jesus do it, and you will see how my will shall be known and fulfilled. Fiat. July 2nd, 1931. How the divine will has the virtue of converting the good that the creature does into her nature. The return of the works to her creator. How the creation has a determined act, while the creature a growing act. I was doing my round in the divine will to follow its acts, and I arrived at the point in which the celestial baby was in Egypt, and the celestial mamma, rocking him, tried to make him fall asleep. And at the same time she was occupied, with her maternal hands, in making a little garment for the divine infant. And I, uniting myself with his mamma, made my I love you to Jesus flow between her fingers and in the thread that was flowing, so as to form and weave the little garment together with my I love you. And upon the foot of the queen that was swinging the cradle, I put my own, so that I too might rock Jesus and do for him what his mamma was doing. And while I was doing this, the celestial baby, between vigil and sleep, was saying, "My two mammas." So remembering this, which is written in the 24th volume, there is a footnote here that says, Volume 24, September 2nd, 1928. I thought to myself, but is my dear Jesus still repeating the sweet words, "My two mammas"? After such a terrible storm, which, like devastating hail, struck my poor soul, who knows how many defects I have committed? Jesus must no longer feel that tender love of saying, so sweetly, "My two mammas." But while I was thinking of this, my lovable Jesus told me, "My daughter, if you have not ceased repeating, uniting yourself with our celestial mamma, rocking me, placing your I love you for me in what she was doing, could I cease saying, 'My two mammas'? Then I would be below in loving you, while I never let myself be surpassed by the love of the creature. Not only this, but you must know that everything that the creature does in my will has the virtue of converting that good which she does into her nature. And true good in nature is never lost, nor are there strains in repeating it as many times as one wants. Do you perhaps strain yourself in order to breathe, to palpitate? Because it is in your nature. Even more if you do not want to do it. You must emit a strain, but a strain that, perhaps, if you can get yourself to do it, will cost you your life. And this is the greatest prodigy of my will, to convert the prayer, the love, the sanctity, its knowledges, into one's nature. And when I see that the creature has given herself prey to my will, but so much that my will was able to change the divine goods into her nature, my words resound in the soul with my creative power, and give them eternity as her nature. And how can I not repeat, "My two mammas"? When I speak, what I say is in reality. Is it perhaps not true that my mamma is mother to me according to the order of nature, and is also mother to me in the divine order, by virtue of the divine will that she possessed? Had she not possessed my will, she could not have been mother to me, either in the human order or in the divine order. Oh, how many things it knows how to do, in one who lets herself be dominated by it. It knows how to make the divine order descend into the human, and it converts the divine order into one's nature, and it makes of her such portents as to astonish heaven and earth. Therefore, let yourself be dominated by my will, and I will make my sweet word resound in you, my dear mamma, whom my Fiat keeps for me on earth. After this, I was following the divine Fiat in the creation, and was saying to myself, I want to enter into the sun, in order to empty it of the love that God placed in it for love of creatures, and on the wings of its light bring it back to my Creator as requital of my love. I want to empty the wind, to bring back to him the requital of the mighty love, of the moaning, ruling love, that it may rule over the divine heart, and snatch from it the kingdom of the divine will upon earth. I want to empty the heavens of the love they contain, to bring back to him the love that never ends, that never says enough, so as to take him from all sides, and bring him the requital of loving him everywhere and in every one. But who can say all my nonsense that I spoke in each created thing? I would be too long, therefore I won't go any further. So while I was doing this, my sweet Jesus told me, Daughter of my will, how pleasing to me is the soul who enters into my will, to find in it all my works, and flying from one created thing to another, with her small capacity, she makes her calculations, to find out what dose of love, of goodness, of power, of beauty, and more, I placed in each created thing. And since for one who is in my will, what is mine is hers, she embraces them all, and brings them back into my womb and around me, as requital of her love. And I feel, being returned to me, the love that we issued in creating the whole creation, the goodness, the power, the beauty with which we strewed all creation. And in our emphasis of love, we say, the daughter of our will returns to us our works, our love, our goodness, and more. And while she returns them to us, she leaves them at their place. And we feel being repeated to us, the glory, the happiness, as if we were again putting out the whole creation. Now, you must know that in creating the whole universe, the variety of many manifold things, we placed a determined act, and enough to each thing, in such a way that they cannot surpass any limit from the way in which they were created. However, even though it was a determined act, and they cannot go any further, it was yet a full act, so much so that creatures are unable, nor do they have the capacity, to take all the good that each created thing contains. This is so true that who can say, I can take all the light of the sun? The heavens are not enough for me over my head. All the waters are not enough for me to quench my thirst. The earth is not sufficient under my feet. And so with many other things. And this, because as our divinity does an act, creates things, our love, the superabundance we possess, is so great that we put in display luxury, pomp. Of none of our works can it be said that it is poor. They all make display, some of luxury, of light, some make pomp of beauty, some of variety of colors, and more. They seem to be saying in their mute language, our Creator is immensely rich, beautiful, powerful, wise, and therefore all of us, as worthy works of him, make display of luxury in the office given to us by God. Now, my daughter, it was not so in creating man. In him was placed, not a determined act, but an act ever growing. Our love did not want to say an enough to man. It would have been like hampering our love, arresting our ardor. No, no, our enough did not pronounce itself in the creation of man. It did not put a limit, but an act ever growing, leaving it almost to his liking where he wanted to reach, and our growing act at his disposal, so that our display of love would not have a limit, but could make pomp of luxury, of grace, of sanctity, of beauty, of goodness, and more, as much as he pleased. We bound our growing act to his free will, so that it might have no hindrance to displaying as much luxury as it could, and so that this growing act of ours might have in man all possible and imaginable helps. We gave him also our will at his disposal, so that it could maintain for him, at its own expense, all the luxury he wanted, and the superabundance of the goods of his Creator. Our love did not have the heart to say enough to man. Our son, up to here you can reach. No, no, it would have been as if a father wanted to say to his son, up to such and such day you will sit at my table, and then enough. This would not be love of paternity, but of mastership. That a son may put a limit in receiving the alimony of his father, this could be. But that a father would say to him, you shall remain on an empty stomach, this he will never do. Such is our goodness. We will never say enough to the creature. Our growing act will serve her as continuous nourishments to always grow and preserve herself. And if ungrateful, she does not make use of our growing act, great gift given by her Creator, we shall have the sorrow of seeing our dear child on an empty stomach, poor, and our act hampered and without life. And our ardor of love will change into ardor of sorrow. So, if you want our growing act to have life in you, never go out of our divine will, which shall be jealous of making you always, always grow. Fiat. July 6, 1931. The Book of the Fiat in the Depth of the Soul. The Book of the Fiat in Creation. How the divine will keeps all creatures under the reign of its continuous act. My poor mind seems to be able to do nothing other than think about the divine will. In each thing that I see, it keeps looking for its life. And as the interior does this, on the outside, it finds nothing other than that divine fiat that so much loves it and wants love. I feel the need to find it in all things, in order to breathe it, to feel its heartbeat of light, which like blood circulates in my soul and constitutes itself primary life of my poor being. And where I am unable to find it, I feel I lack a continuous heartbeat, a breath of air, to facilitate the life of the divine will in my soul. And I was praying Jesus to teach me how to find it in all things, so that its perennial life would never be lacking in me. And my highest good, Jesus, with all goodness, told me, "My daughter, one who does my will and lives in it, forms in her soul the book of the divine fiat. But this book must be full, not empty, or with only a few pages written. If it is not full, she will soon finish reading it, and having nothing to read, she will occupy herself with something else, and therefore the life of my divine will shall be interrupted and as though broken in the creature. On the other hand, if it is full, she will have always something to read, and if it seems that it ends, I shall add other pages more sublime, so that she may never lack the life, the knowledge ever new, and the substantial nourishment of my divine volition." So the interior must be like many pages in order to form this book. Page, the intelligence. Page, the will and the memory. Page, the desire, the affection, the heartbeat. Page, the word, which must be able to repeat what it read. Otherwise, it will remain like a book that will do good to no one. While for one who forms a book, the first purpose is to propagate it. So the whole interior must be written with pages of my divine will, and this book must be so full that she must be unable to find anything else to read but my will alone. Now, when the soul has her interior book full, she will know very well the external book of the divine will. All of creation is nothing other than a book of it. Each created thing is a page that forms an immense book, and of many volumes. So having formed her interior book, and read it thoroughly, she will be able to read very well the external book of all creation. And in all things she will find my divine will in act of giving her its life, its lessons, most high and sublime, and its delicious and holy food. It shall happen to one who has formed in her interior this book of the divine fiat, and has read it thoroughly, as to someone who has possessed a book, has read it over and over again, has studied well the most difficult things, has smoothed out all difficulties, elucidated the most obscure points, in such a way that he has consumed his life over that book. If a person from outside brought to him another similar book, he shall most certainly be able to read it, and shall recognize in that one his own book. More so since my divine will has enclosed the creature within its most holy circle, and has placed in the depth of the soul the book of its fiat. And in creation it has repeated its divine book in such a way that one echoes within the other, and they understand each other in an admirable way. Here is why it is necessary to recognize the book of the divine Fiat in the depth of one's soul. Read it thoroughly to make of it perennial life, and in this way one shall easily be able to read the beautiful pages and the great book of my will of all creation. After this I continued my acts in the divine will, and my sweet Jesus added, "My daughter, my divine volition has its continuous act that never ceases to pour its continuous act upon all creatures, and to invest them with its continuous act of light, of sanctity, of beauty, of love, of help, of power, of happiness. Its love is so great that one act does not wait for another, and like a torrent, more than pouring rain, they pour themselves over all creatures. This continuous act is recognized and received by all the inhabitants of the celestial fatherland, in such a way as to form the ever-new surprise of ineffable joys and of happiness without end. It can be said that it forms the life and substance of the beatitude of all the blessed. Now, since my divine will possesses this continuous act by nature, it cannot, nor does it want to change regime. Just as it gives this continuous act of good in heaven, so does it give it to all creation, and to all creatures, and to each one, because all receive life from this, its continuous act. If it ceased, the life of all would cease. At the most, there can be changes of effects, because it acts according to the dispositions of each one, and therefore its same continuous act produces for some one effect, for some another. And there are some who, unfortunately, while being under the reign of this continuous act of light, of sanctity, of beauty and more, remain not even wet, nor illuminated, nor holy, nor beautiful, and convert within themselves the continuous act of good into darkness, into passion, and maybe even into sin. But in spite of all this, my will never ceases its continuous act of pouring its divine goods over all, because it finds itself in the condition of the sun, which even if human beings, or trees, plants, or flowers, would not want to receive its light, which could communicate the many admirable effects that its continuous act of light contains, that is, sweetness, flavor, the beautiful iris of all colors, would continue its act of always giving light. But if the sun had reason, it would cry with tears of burning light for the sorrow of seeing in the great wheel of its light all the goods which in reality it gives, but are not received. My divine will is more than sun. It keeps everyone and everything enveloped within its infinite light. Its nature is of always wanting to give, and in fact, it gives. If everyone took, everyone would be holy. The world would change into happiness. But with highest sorrow, its goods are not received, but rather rejected into its very light. Yet it does not stop. With tender and insuperable love, it continues its continuous act of giving what its light possesses. Fiat. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 29, Part 10. Fiat.